What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Monday, everybody. I hope you're having a lovely start to the week. There has been a lot of attention in recent days on a new study by Ant Research Institute and Peking University about the difficult situation small businesses are currently facing in China. The report included data from a survey involving over 15,000 micro and small enterprises, and it shows that in the fourth quarter of 2021 last year, these businesses saw their turnover fall to 129,000 RMB on average. This is coming down from about 131,000 in the third quarter. More incredibly, micro and small enterprises saw operating income in the fourth quarter of last year drop to just 30.6% of what it had been during the same period in 2019 on average. Chinese finance expert at Peking University, Michael Pettis, observed on these findings, quote, "This seems a pretty astonishing number to me, and it followed a terrible third quarter, when micro and small enterprises earned 36.1% of what they had made in the third quarter of 2019. This was why average hiring in 2021 Q4 was down more than 40% from Q2, end quote. The report also indicated that insufficient market demand and high operating costs remained the main source of pressure for these businesses, while concerns over policy uncertainties and tax burdens significantly intensified compared with a year earlier. On this point, Pettis observed, "It seems that whatever stimulus Beijing has so far provided to these small and micro enterprises, this has been a fraction of the contraction imposed by the slowdown in the property sector." He went on to explain, quote, "I expect that now that the Spring Festival period is over and we are racing towards the 2 sessions meeting in March, the authorities are going to have to unload their bazookas if they don't want Q2 to be very weak." End quote. Also in the report, the average number of jobs created by micro and small enterprises was about 4.3 in the fourth quarter of last year, down from 6.9 in the second quarter, and suggesting that the health of China's job market has declined. An article with Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post discussing this report also looked back at a China macroeconomic analysis and forecast report published back in December by the Academic Center for Chinese Economic Practice and Thinking at the prestigious Tsinghua University. The December report explained that the tightening of pandemic prevention and control measures had, quote, "deeply affected the work habits and livelihoods of Chinese residents," end quote. This was resulting in consumption being depressed, especially in service sectors such as tourism, hospitality, and transport. The recovery of overseas economies this year could also reduce the share of exports and thus profits of Chinese manufacturers, further lowering the growth rate for employment and the average income of workers. Quote, "It also suggested that the pandemic may have permanently changed the consumption habits of the Chinese people," adding that this could drag down the overall economic growth of the country by 0.4 percentage points. Just another drag to be added to all the others. Over the last several days, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been on a trip visiting with key Asia-Pacific allies. The trip included a special meeting with the foreign ministers of Australia, India, and Japan. With the US, the 4 nations form the so-called Quad Alliance. On Thursday, Secretary Blinken told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, ABC, that the Quad Alliance was, quote, "not about standing against anyone in particular, it is about standing up for a rules-based order, making sure that we uphold these rules and principles if they're being challenged," end quote. While this is a very diplomatic statement, most observers from either side see the Quad as a bloc of Indo-Pacific democracies created to counter China's regional influence. On Thursday, too, the White House said the US will host the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, annual meeting in 2023. The short Quad meeting was held on Friday, which concluded with a joint statement. Now, we don't need to quote it, but we can touch on the main points here. 1. The Quad recognizes that international law, peace and security in the maritime domain underpins the development and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific. 2, we reiterate, this is the language of the joint statement, the importance of adherence to international law, particularly as reflected in the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. It should be noted that the US is not a signatory to this convention, to meet challenges to the maritime rules-based order, including in the South and East China Seas. 3, we are determined to deepen engagement with regional partners. 4, and this is very interesting, the Quad is supporting regional neighbors to build resilience and counter disinformation. 5, Quad partners champion the free, open, and inclusive rules-based order rooted in international law that protects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of regional countries. 6, we reaffirm our commitment to upholding and strengthening the rules-based multilateral trading system with the WTO, World Trade Organization, at its core. 7, we oppose coercive economic policies and practices. 8, we express our commitment to strengthen our diplomatic efforts so that the vision for technologies guided by the Quad principles on technology design, development, governance, and use will be further shared by all like-minded nations. During the Quad event, again on Friday, and just one day after the Australian Defence Minister warned Parliament that the country faced the most complex and potentially catastrophic regional security environment since World War II, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison expressed, quote, "The things we discuss today are principally how we will continue to always stand up for our values, which is what unites most of us." Speaking to reporters after the Quad meeting in response to a question about China, US Secretary Blinken expressed, quote, "I think we share concerns that in recent years China has been acting more aggressively at home and more aggressively in the region and indeed potentially beyond." End quote. So what has China's reaction been to this trip? State-run Global Times has published a series of articles this week on the Blinken trip generally and the Quad meeting specifically. While none of us will be surprised that state media is strongly opposed to the Quad, it's still useful to observe the rhetoric that was employed by it. In a piece titled US-Australia to add more tensions in Pacific while China holds Olympics to promote world peace, the state-run outlet wrote, quote, "Chinese analysts said on Tuesday that Australia is no different from those US allies which act as nothing but US pawns on the geopolitical chessboard to provoke China. But this is truly irresponsible and stupid because such moves would harm regional peace and could result in an arms race." And, quote, "Selfish and ignorant politicians like Dalton and the Lithuanian foreign minister are making their country's diplomatic policies extremely ignorant and inflexible." The critical and anti-American state media coverage continued. In a separate article, the Global Times wrote, quote, "The Chinese Foreign Ministry on Wednesday said the US image of democracy has already collapsed, and using democratic values to form cliques for confrontation is a betrayal of democracy. Stressing democracy, or using the term authoritarian regimes to smear China and Russia and other countries, is a very outdated approach, and is just like finding excuses to legitimize the Crusaders' invasions of the Middle East." And in yet another article, "The US is more like a drowning man clutching at straws. But the more the US wants to leave its own people and the world an impression that it can manage confrontations against China and Russia and maintain a US-led world order, the more embarrassing a situation it is." End quote. Now let's continue with US Secretary Blinken's Asia-Pacific trip. On Saturday, the US Secretary of State met with his counterparts from Japan and South Korea for talks in the US state of Hawaii. The foreign ministers expressed in a joint statement that they shared concerns of, quote, "activities that undermine the rules-based international order," end quote, and strongly opposed, quote, "any unilateral actions that seek to alter the status quo and increase tensions in the region." Fairly boilerplate stuff. North Korea, Russia, and Myanmar were also discussed during the meeting. And last up, Evergrande. While we touched on these developments with Evergrande briefly last week, I've been asked to unpack it a bit more, so that's what we will end this video with. We'll be doing just that. Quickly, if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit the like button. It's the only way this video can be shown to new people. And if you're watching this for the first time, you're getting some value from the episode, maybe consider subscribing, hit that bell notification, and you'll have the most up-to-date analysis when I release these every day. Okay, let's move on. We remember, of course, last week that the chairman of China Evergrande Evergrande Group vowed to speed up construction and complete 50% of outstanding real estate projects within the year, expressing to employees of the crisis hit developer that the company aims to deliver about 600,000 units, or approximately 70 million square meters, to home buyers within the 2022 calendar year. This was at an internal meeting with staff. After months of large parts of the business being suspended in December, nearly 92% of property projects had restarted with Evergrande. This is according to local analysis of their numbers, so we need to take that with a grain of salt. During the meeting, Chairman Hui said that Evergrande had 50 billion RMB, just shy of $8 billion in pre-sale revenue sitting on accounts to ensure projects could resume construction after the Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year or Spring Festival holiday. He also vowed that Evergrande would not sell assets in fire sales at low prices. The thing with this is, though, no one intends or wants to sell their assets at fire sale or low prices. They often have no choice. Analysts at property think tank China Real Estate Information Corp recently observed that there's a consensus that prioritizing construction is the key for distressed developers seeking to ease liquidity issues into the future. They argue that by quote-unquote mobilizing all resources to complete projects, these developers, quote, will then have the leeway to use pre-sales revenue to repay debt and restore market confidence. End quote. We remember from a few days ago that regulators further opened up pre-sales revenue funding for developers, yet another sign of nervous or anxious regulatory easing. Analysts with Caixin observed yesterday that traditionally developers have had some autonomy in how they use these funds, these pre-sale or these escrow funds, such as paying staff salaries, repaying debt. But since the beginning of the Evergrande crisis, construction with a number of projects have been suspended and local governments have tightened their regulatory oversight over these funds because they were concerned about the unrest that could be caused for unfinished homes and hundreds of thousands of families that had paid up front that weren't going to get a house. China Ouyuan Group Limited, Kaisa Group Limited, and Fantasia Holdings Group have also promised to finish projects under construction in recent days. However, promises, like bonds, are not necessarily always repaid. Hey guys, I'd love to hear what you thought about some of the updates we covered in today's episode, so throw your comments below. Always love hearing from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.